This video is a combination of stories from a video that Corpse Husband narrated for us a little while ago, but was taken down, as well as stories your maker and I recorded from BrosGrim. Enjoy! I was about 3 years old at the time. My brother was 5. Our parents were going through a divorce, so my grandparents offered to look after me and my brother until the divorce was final so that we weren't caught up in the mess. My grandparents' anniversary was coming up, so my grandmother thought it'd help our mother take her mind off things to spend some time with us so she could relax. She and my grandfather went out for the evening and left me and my brother home with our mother for the night. Things seemed to be going good at first, nothing out of the ordinary. It was starting to get a bit late and my brother and I were sitting on the living room floor watching television. After a while she asked if we had heard anything, and I remember we both looked at her and she had this worried look on her face. She muted the television for a moment to listen, and we started hearing noises coming from our basement. It was the sound of our bathroom door in our basement swinging open and closed again. It sounded like someone had just walked into the bathroom and slammed the door. But that couldn't be possible, seeing as how me, my older brother, and our mom were the only ones in the house at the time. Mom dismissed it at first, reasoning that the house was just old and old houses usually make strange noises. So we went back to watching television again for a while. After about an hour or so had passed, it was around 8 o'clock, almost time for my brother and I to go to bed. Mom muted the television again and told us to be quiet. We listened for a minute and didn't hear anything at first. Then after a while, we began to hear the sound of pounding coming from the basement just under the living room floor. It was soft at first, but as it went on, it got louder and louder. The sound encircled the living room almost like a shark circling in on its prey. It got closer to where my brother and I were sitting as it circled around us, growing louder and louder until it finally sounded like someone was banging on the living room floor under us with their fists, trying to break through the floorboards. Me and my brother jumped up onto the couch and huddled ourselves close around our mom, who was curled up on the couch and was just as scared as we were. The sounds of the pounding slowly subsided. Mom frantically dialed the restaurant where my grandfather said he and our grandmother would be. After a while, my grandfather picked up and asked what was wrong. Mom told him what we were hearing. My grandfather is still a firm skeptic. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He told her it was probably just the pipes rattling and that she was just under a lot of stress from the divorce and her imagination was running away from her. He then told her to be sure to have us in bed by 9 o'clock and he would see us in the morning, and he hung up. A few minutes went by and we were still huddled together on the couch. Mom did her best to stay calm and hold herself together for me and my brother, saying that Granddad was probably just right. It was an old house after all. So we just went back to watching television, trying to take our minds off of the situation before we had to go to bed. I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but a strong feeling of fear came over my mom as she turned off the television. I could see it in her eyes as my brother and I both looked back at her. We sat there in silence for only a moment. The air was dead quiet. Then the banging started up again, louder than ever. It sounded like someone was frantically trying to break through the floor in a fit of rage. Mom picked up the phone and dialed the restaurant again, but the phone wasn't working. She picked us up both from the floor and pushed us into the main hall and ran to the kitchen to get us our coats from the chair at the end of the table next to the basement door. Suddenly, me and my brother both heard what sounded like a set of heavy combat boots stomping up from the basement stairs and a hair-raising slam against the basement door. It sounded like whoever or whatever was down there wanted to get out. We then heard a tumbling noise as if someone had thrown a chair down the basement stairs. Mom didn't waste a second in getting us the hell out of the front door. She practically threw us outside and we spent the rest of the evening in her car until our grandparents returned home. Our grandmother's car finally pulled into the lot at the top of our street and my grandfather saw that we were sitting in our mom's car and he got angry. He demanded to know why we weren't in bed before they returned home. Mom told them everything. You could just tell by the way she spoke that she was shaken. My brother and I confirmed everything she said, but our grandfather had none of it. He went up to the locked room on the second floor and grabbed a pistol from the gun cabinet and demanded my mom follow him to the basement so that he could show her that there was absolutely no one else in the house. But she refused to follow him into the basement. Of course, after checking everything over, nothing was found to be broken, so there couldn't have been anyone else in the house. Our grandmother didn't need convincing. She had always believed in ghosts. She had stories of her own encounters with the paranormal. But either way, Mum never spent another night in her grandparents' house alone after that. To this day, she refuses to stay after dark. My brother is 30 now and I'm 28. Our grandmother has since passed away and our grandfather's health hasn't been what it should be. So I stay with him and I look after him. To this day, I don't know who or what was in our basement that night. I hope I never find out. But every time my grandfather asks me to go down in the basement to get something for him, I always get the feeling that there's someone watching me down there. And every time I go down there, the bathroom door on the far side of the basement is always open, no matter how many times I close it. Every time I go down there, that goddamn door is always open. A little update on this story. I've looked into the history of my grandfather's house where this event took place. As it turns out, several of the previous owners had died on the property. One person had a heart attack and died in his sleep in one of the bedrooms on the second floor. A second person had died of a blood clot in her brain in our living room. And the third, being the original owner of the house when it was first built in 1911, had fallen down the basement stairs and broke his neck against the wall of the foundation. Could this have been him in our basement?
Junior year of high school, my parents got a job offer out of state, and so I was forced to move all across the country. I started a new school late into the academic year, mid-March, and had a hard time fitting into the new school. All I wanted was to make a friend, but was too shy to talk to anyone. It was around this time that my friends left MySpace to join Facebook, so I did the same to keep close to them. Some days later, I received a friend request from David. David was a guy that I had been friends with in my old town. Well, he wasn't exactly my friend, but rather the friend of another friend. My friend Jerry had introduced me to the group and would bring him along every time all of us hung out. We knew that David was a year older than us and that he had gone to a different school, but other than that, we didn't really know anything about him. In fact, we kind of always just referred to him as Jerry's friend because he never even bothered to talk to any of us. So when I received a friend request from him on Facebook, I was more than confused. He had hardly spoken to me when I had lived near him, so for him to want to be friends with me after all of this time just seemed a little strange. But I was so lonely and desperate for friends that I didn't care. Other than that, nothing really seemed off about him, at least not at the time. Looking back, I do remember that he had hardly any pictures or friends when I first accepted his request, but like I said, this was around the time that people had just started using Facebook, so it didn't seem all that weird for him to have such a barren profile. And over the years, his friends list got a lot bigger, even more so than mine, so I really didn't think anything of it. But anyway, I digress. I accepted his friend request, and it was just like this that David and I became friends. He told me that he had just started university and that he was lonely because he was too shy to make friends. I told him that I was having a hard time in my new school for the same reasons, and we bonded over that. Little by little, we started talking more. He shared his problems with me and I shared mine with him. And when it was time for me to apply to university, he even helped me out. He taught me how to sign up for my SATs, ACTs, helped me apply to scholarships, and even paid for one of my application fees, using a Visa gift card, so I didn't receive any of his personal information, and he didn't receive any of mine. Then, when I finally started university, he helped me with all that as well. He told me where to buy books, gave me studying tips, and provided emotional support. So when he asked for my phone number, I didn't even hesitate to give it to him. David was my best friend, and I wanted to keep him close, even if we were physically away from each other. It was around this time that David started sharing more of his life with me, and all of it was pretty normal stuff. He had a job at Pizza Hut, which he hated but needed to keep in order to pay for bills. He also played soccer, but not for his university or anything. It was just a group of guys that got together on the weekends to unwind. I think the biggest thing he told me was that he had flunked out of university and that I was the only one that knew because he was too embarrassed to tell anyone else. And at one point, he also had to move back in with his mom, which he hated a lot. 2, maybe 3 years into our friendship, my family decides to take a trip back to the city where we had lived prior to moving all across the country, and I excitedly tell him and all of my old high school friends. Most of them were pretty excited about the idea of us all hanging out together again because after high school we had all just gone our different ways. But when I contacted David about it, he showed little interest in hanging out with us. I thought it was weird. You know, I wasn't some stranger he had met online, but rather someone who had been in his life for many years. I kept insisting and asking for a reason, and then he finally gave me one. He told me that his pictures had been heavily edited and that he was afraid of disappointing me if we met in real life. I told him that it didn't matter what he looked like and that I just wanted to meet him, but he still didn't want to hang out. Instead, he just started being a huge dick to me. He knew exactly what buttons to push, knew all of my insecurities and secrets, and had started using all of that knowledge to hurt me. So I just stopped talking to him. Some weeks later, I meet my friends as planned, and much to my surprise, I see David there, looking just like he did on his pictures. I didn't understand why he had lied about photoshopping his pictures or why he had said he didn't want to meet me only for him to show up at our friend's house. But I was so angry at him that I didn't ask any questions. I just kept waiting for an apology, but David wouldn't approach me. He was treating me like he treated me back when we were in high school. I was really upset, but given that he had been such a huge dick to me, I just figured that this was just another attempt at getting under my skin. We were all drinking and talking about what we were up to, and when it was his time to share, he pretty much just said the same things I already knew about him. He said that he wished he was still in university like the rest of us, but that he had flunked out and he was just living with his mom. Said that he was miserable there and that he wanted to move out, but that his job at Pizza Hut wasn't paying him enough for him to move out on his own. At this point though, I was already pretty pissed off, and the alcohol had given me enough courage to finally ask him why he had been ignoring me. He apologized, but admitted that he hardly remembered me, which hurt my feelings but also pissed me off even more. I told him about Facebook and about our text messages, and he just kept insisting that he didn't use Facebook. Apparently, he had used MySpace at one point, but had stopped using that when he had switched over to Tumblr. A Facebook account was something that he hadn't even considered making. I asked him about the text messages, and he just said that I had probably confused him with another David because he had never even had my number. I thought that denying it was a lousy excuse, but Jerry backed him, which pisses me off even more. The thing, though, was that David hadn't just been talking to me on Facebook, but also to a bunch of us. So when we kept calling him out on his shit, he just told us to text this David guy to prove that it wasn't him. He set his phone on the table and I texted him, but no new messages appeared on his phone. Then, while we're all arguing how we need to give it some time, the David that I had been talking to for years responds, proving that we had been talking to a fake all along. Things turned pretty awkward at this point, with all of us feeling angry and betrayed, and David obviously feeling extremely violated. So with all of us wanting answers, we open up our friend's laptop and search for David's profile on Facebook. The first thing that David points out is that whoever this was, they were using his mother's maiden name and not his real last name. And that while most of the people on his friends list were people that he knew in real life, none of them were people that he had kept in contact with. His display picture was also of a dog, which he owned years ago, but had died since then, just like the fake David had told me. All measures that, looking back, I'm guessing were used by this person to keep David's close friends from actually finding him on Facebook. The older pictures on Facebook had been taken from his MySpace back when he had still been using that, but most of the newer ones had been taken from his Tumblr, which he apparently uploaded pretty often. The weirdest thing, though, was there was some pictures he swore he had never seen before. These were all pictures of his soccer games taken from the audience, which the fake David had said his brother had taken. The real David said his brother never went to his games, neither did any of his family members or friends. Further exploring his own fake profile, David pointed out that while a bunch of status updates were things that never happened, a lot of them were accurate. Whoever this person was, they had been watching David for a long time. They knew his schedule, knew what movies he went to, knew what kind of ice cream flavors he liked, knew his favorite bands, knew practically everything about him. We did confront fake David, but he never answered the text messages and instead deleted the profile before we had the chance to examine it further. So we never did get any answers. I don't know why that person pretended to be David for so long or why he even did it in the first place. All I know is that I felt extremely violated for having shared so many private details of my life with him. And of course, I also felt a great deal of pity for the real David. I wondered for the longest time how this person found him and how they managed to learn so many private details of his life. Then, a few months back, my mother calls me saying that she found a profile with her name, but my picture's on it. My middle name is my mom's first name, something that very few people know. She thought that I had made a second profile and I didn't tell her the truth because I didn't want to scare her, but the truth was that I didn't even know that profile existed. I have always kept Facebook set to private and I no longer accept random friend requests, nor do I post my pictures anywhere else. So this profile only had really old pictures of me and nothing weird like David's soccer game pictures. But it was still active and had been active for a while.
This is a true story, folks. As much as I'd like to be a writer, I am not one. Spring 2014 is a slow season for my father's business. The weather is nice and the roads are clear, which means slow shifts at an auto shop. It was mid-April, around 4 p.m. The wind was pulling in a nice spring breeze when my dad, Bill, was walking along the side of his shop. It happened to overlook a small stream and a running trail, which he enjoyed gazing at near the end of his shift. The side of his building ran along the top of a steep hill which turned into the path. He heard a ruffling in the wind and about halfway down the hill he sees a big blue tarp. Being very proud of his business and its appearance, he started to climb down the hill. He was just about to grab for it about 15 feet away to toss it in the dump when he saw a car pull into the lot. He turned around and went to help his customer. When 5:30 rolls around, he closes up and goes home, forgetting the tarp. The next afternoon, Bill is sitting in his office when 3 policemen came in. They asked my father and coworkers a bunch of questions about any suspicious behavior they might have seen. Side note, my dad is extremely charismatic and friendly. He oftentimes talks people into sharing information with him that they really shouldn't. He looks like someone you can trust, and you can, and he seems to always have the insider details about things like this. He used his humor to make people feel comfortable, which helps getting strangers to open up to him. Anyway, so Bill and his coworker Hank are talking with a female police officer when she lets it slip that a body has been discovered just down the hill. "Oh shit, I was just down there yesterday cleaning. I didn't see any body though," Bill said. "Around what time? Do you happen to see a large blue and white tarp while you were cleaning the area?" she asked intensely. Actually, yeah, I almost grabbed it yesterday, but I ended up getting distracted." She asks him more questions about what time, what he saw, etc. when he asked her if the body was found in the tarp. Yes, it was. A woman jogging found it this morning around 10:30 a.m. My dad was floored. He was just there yesterday. After a few more questions, the police all head to the crime scene to finish the initial investigation. No one was allowed on the scene, and the police were asking that passers-by not take any pictures. Luckily for you guys, my dad took one from his office window. This is what it looked like. You can see near the top of the picture the running trail. Just in front of that is part of the creek that is dried up. There are the officers and such searching for whatever they were searching for. You can also see just left of the officer in black a tiny shade of blue. That would be the tarp. Fast forward a few days. The police went back to my father's shop. They noticed a security camera set up around the building, and they were hoping that it might catch someone on tape. While transferring the data over, my dad started asking more questions about the murder. He learned it was a middle-aged man that had been stabbed to death. Not too much to go on as it seemed. "Hey, you know there are a couple of meth heads that live in this shack behind our shop. It's connected to that bar." Bill started talking about his own predictions for the who-did-it scenarios. He continued, "Yeah, we have a lot of problems with them, stealing scrap metal from the back, letting their dogs run wild. Even had him threaten to shoot me once when I was spraying their dogs with water to quit the barking. You should check them out." The officer nodded, gathering the rest of his things and left. "Hey Hank, let's go down there, see if we can find anything cool," my father whispered to his coworker. "Alright, I guess it wouldn't do any harm. Hank replied hesitantly. They started down the hill where the trench was found. The grass was flat and the tarp was now gone. They walked around for 15 or so minutes when Bill headed up the stream a little ways. The trail runs under a main road and then leads to a man-made lake. Just under the bridge, the water starts to get heavier and the trees are a bit thicker. He noticed a red Lowe's cart in one of the trees. I'm taking that for the shop, he thought, as he ran over to pull it out of the stream. Calling over Hank for help, the two of them pull it out and start wheeling it back up the hill. Suddenly, my dad stops. He sees something on the cart. What is that rusty looking stuff? Hank, stop. Look at the fucking cart. Is that blood? They looked closer and sure enough, blood. It was all over the cart. On the handle, on the wheels, and the side. But it wasn't only blood they started to notice. Hair. Human hair. Utterly stunned, my dad calls the policewoman he had been talking to the previous days and explained what they found. For whatever reason, the PD were very skeptical that this was evidence. At first, they didn't even believe my father when he told them it made no sense to make up. They sent out a car. There were 2 police officers and a CSI. The CSI asked my dad why he thought this was blood. It looks like blood, sir. I'm not sure. How do you know that this is human hair? The CIA asked. Because it looks like human hair, my dad snapped sarcastically. Why did he seem so hesitant? They used a chemical test and sure enough, it tested positive for human blood. They took the card as evidence and thanked my dad. Again, my dad tried to give his opinion on who the mystery killer might be. He suggested again that they talk with the crazy neighbors behind his auto shop. Still no information was taken down and they left with what they had. 2 more days pass. My dad is leaving the shop to get some things from Costco. There is a small dirt alley that leads to the main road, just behind his work. In the past, it had been blocked by one of the meth addicts' cars. They were complaining to my dad and his boss about the business driving cars back and forth through the alley, disrupting them. He notices it's open and decides to take the shortcut to his destination. But something was off. He saw the usual blocked car sitting in front of the shack. The door was wide open and there was someone sitting on their knees with their upper body inside the car. He got in his car and crept up, just a little, so he could see what was happening. He right away recognized the skinny red-headed woman as the female that lived in the shack. It was the shack guy's wife or girlfriend. He didn't know exactly. She was on her hands and knees surrounded with hard chemicals, bleach, Comet, OxyClean, and much more. My dad had said that he knew right then that they were guilty. For one, why would someone be scrubbing their car with straight chemicals? No water, no rinsing. It was the middle of the day on a hot June afternoon. Second, they happened to be only 2 blocks away from a local car wash. He said it felt off and he knew to trust his instincts. She just kept scrubbing and scrubbing the passenger side floor. He pulled out his phone and started recording her. Now he's known this woman and her significant other for a few years now. Like I said, they complained about my father's workers and he complained about their dogs on and off for a while. It was all harmless bickering. My dad, always trying to be the funny guy, yells out his window as he's driving past. Covering up a murder, he laughed and drove away, hearing her say "fuck you" as he drove off. This time, when he called the police, they took it very seriously. He explained that she was cleaning the car aggressively, and that it seemed like she was trying to bleach something out of her car. The next day, the PD went by to talk with the residents of the shack. The day after that, they made an arrest. After searching the shack, they found a large blood stain soaked into the plywood floor. Once the blood was seen, the wife or girlfriend crumbled and told the police everything. It was her husband or boyfriend, and the victim. The victim was named Rich. He had gone over to their little house to shoot up and get high. Someone ended up accusing Rich of putting some of the dope aside from himself, and things got heated. Eventually, the husband started to physically fight with Rich when he stabbed him. He bled out on the floor and died. They did not know what to do, so they stole a Lowe's cart to move him around, loaded him into the car, wrapped him in the tarp, and pushed his body down the hill. They ditched the cart, thinking the river would wash it down far enough that it wouldn't be found. My dad and Hank sit in their car while they watch the police arrest Dawn. the suspected murderer. He took a video of that as well. You can hear my dad very inappropriately yelling out his window, "Haha, killer," in the video. Both videos were lost when he switched phones. But here's a link to the site that reported on the events. My dad says that he's gonna start a PI business. Yeah, right. Because he solved a murder all on his own.
This happened about 5 years ago after my fiance and I had been living in our house for a little over a year. I am 6 foot tall and about 225 pounds. I've always been naturally muscular and am told I have an intimidating demeanor. My fiance is 5'2", weighs maybe 130 pounds. Tiny little thing. Our house is a bi-level home where you walk in the front door and there are 2 half staircases going up to the living room and down to the basement. The only access to our backyard is through the sliding glass door in the upstairs living room and down the stairs from our deck, which is important for this story. During this time I partied a lot, way more than I should have. I was between jobs and it was toward the end of the holidays, so my interest in finding a new job wasn't quite what it should have been. Many of these nights I was out partying, I would end up just crashing with friends, which meant my fiance spent many nights alone with our 3 dogs. I had a serious problem with substance abuse, primarily alcohol, and I'm sad to say I was letting it get the better of me. Fast forward a couple months and I had just found a new job that had random drug and alcohol tests. A godsend in hindsight. I had been sober all of 2 days and had begun repairing my relationship with my fiance when she told me how glad she was I was sleeping at home again. I thought nothing of it and kissed her on the head and told her I was too and that I loved her. Later that night, my fiance and I were watching TV downstairs when I thought I heard something moving in our backyard. The dogs heard it too, but I dismissed it because they just perked up their ears, but didn't seem too alarmed. A moment later I heard the noise again, and my fiance very quickly mutes the TV and gives me a very nervous look. "Did you hear that?" she asked, looking very uncomfortable. I told her that it's probably just a few of the neighborhood cats playing in our bushes, as there are quite a few outdoor cats living in the area, but she shook her head and began insisting that this wasn't the case. Before I could even ask her what made her so sure, I hear our sliding glass door upstairs fly open. All 3 of my Great Danes and myself are on our feet in an instant. The dogs let out the most ferocious sounding barks I've ever heard and tore ass up the stairs with me right behind them. As I'm rounding the first set of stairs and the dogs are reaching the top of the second set, I see the sliding glass door slam closed and the silhouette of a man running away. I get to the door and fling it open and the dogs shove me out of the way to chase after this would-be intruder. I grab my flashlight, one of those big 4D cell mag lights that cops carry, and run out into the yard. I had just made it down the deck stairs when I see the dogs freaking out at the back fence. I sprint over and jump the fence just in time to see the man reaching the opposite fence and trying to get over it. He was covered head to toe in black clothing, a thick black hoodie with the hood pulled tight to conceal his face, and jet black cargo pants. Without any regard for my personal safety, I charge the man and just barely miss getting a hold of him as he makes it over the fence. Once more, I follow him over and come around the front of my neighbor's house just in time to see him hop into an old, beaten-up pickup and speed off. I watch for a moment as he speeds out of the neighborhood and disappears into the night. I run back home as fast as I can and check on my fiancée to make sure she's okay. When I walked into the house, she was sitting in the upstairs living room surrounded by all 3 of our Great Danes and clutching the biggest knife we own. She was visibly shaken, but ultimately she is a very strong woman and told me that she was ready in case I got into trouble. After calling the cops, giving statements, and triple checking to make sure every door and window in the house was locked up tight, we decided to watch another movie as neither of us were tired after the adrenaline rush we had just been through. During the movie, I asked her what made her so sure that it wasn't just cats playing in the yard. What she told me was enough for me to decide it was time to change my whole life. She said that for about a month now, she has been hearing strange noises coming from all around the house late at night. She would hear footsteps outside and occasionally what sounded like whispering. When I asked her why she never told anyone, she just shook her head and said she didn't know. After hearing this, I came to the realization that whoever this man was, He knew that I was never home at night, and that my fiance essentially was all alone most of the time. Fortunately for us, he somehow missed the fact that we have 3 Great Danes, and for whatever reason on this night he decided not to check and make sure she was alone again.
My grandfather and I were at his trailer up north, at this little nice trailer park. The kind where everybody knows everybody. I had this nice group of friends, whom I would hang out with every day and night. We would go to the swimming pool during the really hot days, and sometimes work out at the indoor fitness area. And once in a while, we would play little dumb games on the little playground. We were the only teenagers there, so we essentially had the entire park for our enjoyment. When night fell, we would always play manhunt. In case you don't know how this game works, the object is for one person to find everyone else and tag them. Once you were tagged, you had to join the hunter and find the others, eventually finding everyone else and resetting the game with a new hunter. The game was only fun at night, since it added a little frightening aspect to the game and made it much harder to find the prey. And of course, it would give us guys time to mac on the girls in private. One night, we decided to change the game rules a bit. Once you were tagged, you would have to go sit on the playground and sit on the highest point and wait for the game to finish. There were 10 of us when we started. Myself, my buddies Jeff, Robbie, Bam, and Dom, and then 5 other girls whose names I really can't remember, but the only one important in this story is Julie. After drawing straws, it was decided that Robbie was going to be the hunter. The rest of us booked it away from him ASAP, so that he couldn't predict where we were. One of the girls, Julie, accompanied me in heading towards the wharf to hide amongst the boats. We started the game at around 8 p.m., so it was fairly dark out at the time. Not pitch black, but enough so that you could barely see ahead of you. The fog from the lake helped keep us out of sight. I decided to hide up behind my grandfather's boat, since we couldn't get in trouble if we were found by any of the park's groundkeepers. In the meantime, I decided to try to make my move on Julie. After some rather lewd actions, I heard somebody walking on the boards of the wharf. I covered Julie and myself with my black sweater and tried to hide us. All of a sudden, the noise stopped. I peeked out of the hoodie to see what was there, but there was nothing but blackness. I poked my head up to see if there was anyone around, but all there was to see was the beginning of the dock and 2 boats. It definitely sounded as if it was coming from right in front of us, so now Julie and I are really spooked, so we snuck out of the dock and headed towards the pool. We hid under one of the big lounge chairs and kept a lookout. Suddenly, something grabbed both my ankles and also Julie's. We screamed like banshees and turned to see Robbie, who was laughing his ass off at our fear. "Man, you guys are such pussies," he cackles. I take a big sigh of relief, knowing that it wasn't a wolf, or worse, a groundskeeper. Julie and I then head to the playground to wait for the game to end. We're just chilling and looking around at the stars, typical boring shit, when all of a sudden we hear a howl from the distance. Not close, but like across the park distance. Maybe Robbie found another person, I said in an attempt to crack a joke and distract Julie. She giggles and tells me she wants to sleep for a while and to wake her up when the game is over. Despite the fact that I wanted to get into her pants again while we were still alone, I obliged and gave her my hoodie to use as a pillow while I kept a watch out for the others. After some time passes, I see a figure out in the distance. I can't see much because of the darkness, but I can make out a larger figure that looks to be male. I assume it's Jeff or Bam, because who the fuck else would be out here at this time of night? So I yell, "Did the wolves get ya?" The guy gets close enough for me to see and make out that it's Bam, shuffling towards us. "That tired, huh? Maybe you should have picked a better spot," I yelled to him. "That fucker Robbie sure knows how to run, I'll tell you what," Bam says as he climbs the playground to our spot. "Sleeping Beauty here already done?" Bam exclaims as he takes a seat across from me. "Yeah, couldn't handle all this man," I say, letting out a few chuckles. I asked him if he had heard the wolf howl, and he tells me he heard it close to where he was hiding and decided to book it away from there just in case they decided to hunt him instead. We laugh and look around the area surrounding the playground, keeping an eye out for the other people, when we hear yet another howl in the distance. Only this time, it's accompanied by 2 other howls. Maybe we should just chill here. Those mutts couldn't climb all the way up here anyway, Bam declares while pulling a flask out of his jacket. A deep voice bellows from the darkness. "Wanna pass that this way, cowboy?" We were just about to shit our pants as we look down to see Jeff staring up at us from the bottom of the playset. After Jeff climbs up, we pass around the flask of what I think was some cheap whiskey. Bam nearly chokes on it when he suddenly starts yelling, "What the fuck is that?" pointing behind me and Jeff. I turn around to see 3 big-ass coyotes standing on their hind legs, at least 8 foot tall, with big arms and a narrow, bony body, at least 50 meters away from us. They had their arms at their sides, almost looking like fucking werewolves or some shit, as they slowly walked towards us. We all go into fight or flight mode, panicking and trying to figure out what to do with these things. The creatures start picking up their pace and start making audible growling noises as they approach the playground. This was still during the time where cell phones were just becoming popular, yet none of us had one on us because we didn't allow phones during the game. It was obvious that if they tried to climb up the set, they could, because if they could walk on 2 legs, they could sure as hell reach us. They reach about the 30-meter mark, when all of a sudden there's a howl in the distance, which for some reason stops the creatures from getting closer. They start looking at us, and then the direction of the noise, and decided to get on 4 legs and bolt in that direction at breakneck speeds, like from 0 to 200 kilometers in a second. I wake up Julie and decide that we are just gonna get the fuck out of there in case these Satan spawns come back. We get to the wharf and get into my grandfather's boat and put the tarp over us to hide until dawn so we can see where we are going. Yeah, this might seem like a bad idea, because there is no real protection if those things find us, but we could at least try swimming if shit gets heavy. Bam starts going nuts and says, "Okay, what the fuck just happened? What the hell are we gonna do, Red?" Of course, I have no idea what to do, but because I have to try and keep the group somewhat calm, I make up some bullshit lie like I can drive the boat out in the lake if those things come back. Unfortunately, I actually didn't have the keys, so escape was a no-go. So here's the situation. We have 4 scared as fuck teenagers. It's around midnight, so 0 visibility, no cell phones, 3 beasts of unholy nature that will most likely maul us if we run into them, 6 other teenagers that are either dead, or at the very least in danger, and we have no way to know if they are attacked, because I made the mistake of trapping us in a fucking boat. With the situation being as fucked as it is, I tell the others that the only way to survive is to stay quiet and wait on the boat until dawn, so we can at the very least see where we are going. They all agree out of sheer desperation. In the meantime, I search the boat to see if we can find something to defend ourselves with. That's when I find the emergency flare gun set under the captain's seat. "What are you gonna do with that?" Julie asks. I tell them that flares scare off most, if not all, predatory animals, and that it might be our only way left of fending the things off if they come back. All in all, there are 5 flare shots and 2 flare sticks in the kit. After what seemed like an eternity, I noticed that the tarp was starting to light up. I look over at the others and see Jeff look at me with this smile like a kid in a candy shop. I pop one of the tarp buttons and see the sun rising over the lake. Seeing as how I had our only protection, I left the boat to scout the area around the dock. I exit the boat and look around and didn't notice anything in the surrounding area, just the normal camp area. I beckon the others out of the boat, and we start making our way back to the play area to see if anyone else is around. What we saw at the playground looked like something out of a tornado damage video. The whole park was scratched to shit, and some of the poles were torn up and bent. I feared the worst as I looked to see if anyone was there. I see Robbie and all the other girls bawling their fucking eyes out and shaking as if they were freezing. We asked them what had happened, and they told us that at some point, Robbie had managed to find the whole group of girls smoking weed behind one of the trailers. He howled after finding them and tagging them, which then seemed to be what called the beast away from us originally. They then explained how they had to run for their lives to the playground because the beast ended up running after them on their hind legs like Olympic runners. When they reached the playset, they managed to just hide there without making a sound while the beast tore up the entire exterior of the playset. Somehow, without actually hurting any of the girls or Robbie. We all decided to tell the park owner of what happened and show him the playset. Because he thinks we are all just a bunch of hooligans, he ends up banning all of us from the park and chalked out the playset damage as us being reckless and stupid. He didn't charge us for the damages though. We all met one last time before leaving, and we all decided to not tell a soul of what happened because nobody would believe us. Yet here I am, telling you all what happened on that night. Can any of you try to explain to me what the hell those things are?
So I'll start off by saying this story is pretty long and is going to make my friend and I sound like complete fucking idiots. This is because we are. We completely ignored everything we've ever been told about stranger danger and basic safety because hey, we are both 20-year-old college dudes. I'm also not the best writer, so bear with me. This happened last Sunday. My parents are pretty well off and love to travel to exotic destinations. They planned a trip to St. Lucia and extended an invitation to my sister, her boyfriend, and my friend Vince and I. St. Lucia is a small mountainous jungle island near the coast of Venezuela. It's a significantly underdeveloped nation with an all-cash economy where few taxes are collected and spent for the good of the commons. Violent crime on the island is not unheard of. There are a few paved roads, a few major towns, and a couple of small, secluded, high-end, boat-accessible resorts. We stayed at one of those resorts. My parents were in one room, and the rest of us stayed in a room next door. The rooms were more like little huts open entirely to the outdoors with easily accessible rooftops above and below. All was well for most of the trip. We went hiking, snorkeling, and relaxed on the beach. As much as my friend and I enjoyed it, this resort was meant for honeymooners, not for college kids looking to have a wild time. One night, Vince and I were up drinking late at the bar, which was not extremely lively as usual, and we get talking with the bartender, Gustavo. We bond with Gustavo over our interests in Yeezy, Wheezy, and girls, and nothing seemed off at all. We asked him if he knew any good clubs or where to go to have a good time in town. He told us about how we had to leave the resort to really experience St. Lucia as we expected. He offered to take us to his place sometime to show us a good time we'd be looking for. He then showed us a picture of his house. This should have been the first red flag, but we were drinking and had no reason not to trust our new friend. Gustavo had a massive house for a St. Lucian, complete with a huge flat screen TV, pool table, bar, and a Camaro. We had been around the island a bit at this point and had not seen a house or a car half as nice as his. We told him we'd be interested, but would have to let him know when we could go later. The next day we get a text from Gustavo midday saying that a boat was at the dock to pick us up. This was strange to Vince and I since we hadn't agreed upon a time. We told him we had plans and couldn't go during the day anyway. This seemed to piss him off a little bit. The next day, whenever Vince and I would see Gustavo at the resort, he lacked enthusiasm and ignored us when we said hello to him. The following day, however, Gustavo was off work and texting us like we were best friends again. He asked us if we could come to his place and told us he was making pizza and had girls lined up and some of that good. Knowing that my parents would never let us do something so risky, we told him that we could only go after 10 o'clock because my parents were most likely to be asleep at that point. He agreed but was kind of annoyed and made it sound like we owed him and better not bail again. On a side note, I've never done coke, but my friend Vincent has. I was slightly worried, but figured I'd just say no like Dare taught me to or whatever and still have a good time. Besides, we couldn't bail twice. As 10 o'clock rolled around, my parents had gone to sleep, my sister and her boyfriend had gone elsewhere, and Vincent and I finished up pre-gaming at the beach bar near the dock until it closed for the night. It started getting very dark, and as soon as Vincent and I were about to be the only ones down at the dimly lit beach area, this is when things really started to get sketchy. Around 10:45 we get a call from Gustavo saying something along the lines of, "The plans have changed, the boat taxi is no longer being arranged through the resort. My guy is coming to pick you up. The fare is going to be more expensive now, around $100 US plus tip. He's nice, but he has a temper and he's in a hurry, so don't piss him off. Look for the green and yellow boat and just get in." The unfamiliar flat and low tone of the voice he used sent chills down our spine, and suddenly we knew we were in serious trouble. We only had $140 on us together, and immediately agreed that we would wait for the boat, give him the cash, and say we couldn't go anymore. A few minutes later, we get another call saying, "My guy is going to be a little late. He has some drop-offs to make, but if you're not at the dock when he gets there, he will be knocking on room 17. Don't make him knock." Room 17 is the room my parents are staying in. Vincent is about to throw up at this point, trying to stay calm. I suggest we hide our phones and wallets nearby just in case they try to mug us. There was nobody but us at the beach at this point. I could barely make out some small boats far out in the bay, but they hadn't moved in a while. We are standing on a small rock peninsula at the side of a cliff surrounded by black water with a single dim lamp overhead. We cannot run and we cannot hide. My parents and my sister and her boyfriend may be in serious danger if we do. 11:30 p.m. We get another call from Gustavo. "There will be 3 boats coming, just get in." This is now obviously fucked. We are fucked. We are so fucked. Why the fuck are there 3 boats? Vincent and I are both pretty skinny guys. There's no way we could fight more than one person. It's the perfect kidnapping, I thought to myself. Vince and I are weak young adults who come from apparent well-off families who didn't tell anyone where we were going or what they were doing. Gustavo knew all these things and obviously had the resources and connections to pull abductions off, or worse. I spot what appears to be a security guard making rounds down the beach a ways and immediately walk as fast as I can to him with Vincent. I explain without using Gustavo's name that we are supposed to be picked up by 3 boats and that we feel extremely uncomfortable after recent events and just want to pay the boat captain and leave. My hope was that if we didn't get kidnapped, or at least one person would know where the fuck we went or what happened to us. My hope was that if we did get kidnapped, at least one person would know where the fuck we went or what happened to us. He assured us that no boats come around this time and that we shouldn't wait too much longer. We walk not 100 feet before we get the single most chilling text I've ever read. "Did you just talk to security?" Vince and I both froze and stared at each other for a few seconds. We decided to reply and say we were just chatting with them and heading back and that we couldn't go anymore because it's too late. He quickly replied, "Don't worry, haha." We replied, "Seriously, don't send the boats, we're not going anymore." Once again, his response was, "Don't worry, haha," followed by yet another, "Don't worry, haha," and that was the last time we heard from him. I've seen the movies. Coke dealers don't usually treat rats very nicely. Maybe Gustavo knew that I didn't use his name, and maybe that's why we were able to get out of this mess. Was the security guard in on it, or were we being watched the whole time? I will never know. Not knowing what to do, Vincent and I started climbing the few hundred stairs up the mountain back to our room with purpose. It was dark now, with the only occasional dim lamp along the way. Every single sound, every single movement surrounding the jungle scared the living shit out of us. I've never felt this afraid in my entire life. We get back to the room, lock the door, and I go out on the patio to silently watch the easily climbable roof like a fucking hawk. Vincent swears that he has hands down on the edge of the roof, but they were gone. Vincent swears that he saw hands on the edge of the roof, but they were gone when I pointed my phone's flashlight at them. For the next 2 hours I sat there, head on a swivel, ready to fucking scream to wake my family up and fight for my life. Well, freaking the fuck out, I saw a meteor burn up in the clear night sky, which was easily the highlight of my night. So that was pretty cool, I guess. Eventually we figured it was over and went to bed. Relieved to wake up in the morning without my throat slit, I relaxed for a bit. Luckily, we were checking out of the hotel at 11, so we wouldn't have to run into Gustavo again. Before leaving the resort, Vincent and I wandered down to the beach to kill some time. That's when 2 large native men that did not appear to work at the resort approached us. The larger one said, "Hey, are you the guys that we were supposed to pick up on the boat last night? You know, Gustavo?" I replied no, trying my best to sound confused. "How much longer are you guys staying?" he asked. "We're leaving in an hour," I replied. He looked at me with a "I know you're lying to me" face, held out his fist, grinned, and said with a low voice, "Safe trip home." I bumped his fist and walked away trying to stay cool. It felt like everyone who worked at the resort was looking at us and whispering about us for the next hour. I just wanted to get the fuck out. I didn't feel safe until we made the hour drive to the airport and got through security. Gustavo and your friends, let's not meet again.
Many spooky encounters have happened to me in my childhood and adolescence, but there are only a few that I hang on to, instead of shrugging them off and erasing them from my mind altogether. The story I'm about to tell you is long due to a chain of events, and please forgive me if the story gets a little stressed out more than it needs to be through intricate detail. So the story starts back 8 years ago. I was a fairly young kid who lived in a trailer park between 2 towns in eastern Iowa. Each town was about 5 miles out, and there wasn't much to them at the time. The trailer park was pretty desolate, and it was consumed by fields of corn and timber. Back then, it wasn't hard for me and my childhood friend Brock, who I'm still in contact with today, to stay occupied. Cap guns and lightsaber battles were part of our daily agenda. It was nice and simple. However, things started to spiral a bit, and I'm still trying to come to grips with them today. It was a cloudy and musty overhang summer day. My friend and I were doing our normal ritual of pretending to fight off Sith overlords, until one of us, I'm not sure exactly who, had the bright idea to bring the game into the cornfield. Looking back, in retrospect, it was probably one of the most foolish mistakes we made that could have saved Brock and me a whole lot of trouble. Our game shifted to the cornfield, and it was really cool, until about 10 minutes in. We got so into the game that at some point we split up, which at first wasn't a bad idea, but things turned grim quickly. After another 10 minutes or so, my friend and I regrouped back in the cornfield, and what we saw still haunts me today. About 15 yards away was a distinguishable figure moving towards us. It was clearly a man, and he was roughly 6 feet tall. The man was looking me straight in the eyes. I remember his face and appearance clearly. He was wearing torn up jeans, a white t-shirt with sweat stains, and his face was beaten up with scars and a slightly purple tint in his lips. We were completely in shock when he started making his way towards us. He started approaching faster, quickly accelerating. I could see the malevolent intentions in his eyes. I was frozen for 10 through 15 seconds before I realized my friend had already booked it out of there. We ran for 5 minutes straight, not even looking back. We ended up making it to the cornfield, regrouped once again, and made it to safety at his grandmother's house. We then made a pact to never tell each other's grandparents. However, it doesn't end there. A week later, things became more odd. Daily occurrences would happen. My grandfather would leave for work every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, but he would always find random trinkets and surprises on our porch each day. However, they were never the same. To give you a gist of some of the items, from what I recall was a severed doll head, some notes with gibberish written on them, bags of human feces, and a pair of muddy shoes. It was summer now, and the collection of random items had come to a halt. I wished to say that it was all over, but it wasn't. One night, I had been gently falling asleep in my bed when I heard a soft knock on my window. Keep in mind, I lived directly across the street from the cornfield where my friend and I had our first encounter. I hadn't been frightened by the knock, as I figured it was just Brock wanting me to sneak out with him to go fuck around. I peeked out my blinds. I was wrong. Across the street, I saw a familiar silhouette, dimly lit by the streetlights, with his arms raised up waving at me. I could even see his yellow, crooked smile. I closed my blinds, rushed to my grandparents' room, and, scared shitless, told them what had happened, and told them about the first encounter with my friend. They dialed the police immediately, who showed up very quickly and made a futile effort to comfort me. It only gets worse from there. Another week or so later comes the final encounter. My friend and I were not allowed to go anywhere alone. We either had to escort each other or be accompanied by an adult. On the night of this last encounter, we were at my friend's house in the yard tossing the football. Daylight was dwindling and fading into night. My friend and I were about 20 feet away from each other playing catch when I had thrown the ball past him and he had to go retrieve it. As soon as he went back to get it, I noticed his attention shift towards the alley which led to his shed door. His face grew pale and he walked towards me, trying to play it off, but he was obviously scared. He shoved me in the front door and alerted his grandmother. He said, "He's in the shed. He's in the shed and has a knife. Call the police." His grandmother didn't take a second thought and dialed them immediately. The police showed up and had to escort the man out of the shed. It turns out that he had been following my friend and I around since the first encounter, and had been taking shelter in their shed since it had never been locked. We've both moved away from the neighborhood since then, and have never spoken a word of it again.
A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you?" "Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you?" "That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward up the back steps and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then, the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home, and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure. Could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later, my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his back from the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone, I couldn't play outside, I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mom and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. They'd seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke up to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cop said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself. About the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside even when it was locked. And about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch and how the lock could be easily finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to the company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West's roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light, this way we could still see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked, loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out of the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened and they walked around the yard watching for him. They came back in and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped. So we just went back in, each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as his snack. You know that sensation you get when you could just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen through the doorway into the dining room at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel the eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows to the door. It had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There, on the other side of the window pane, was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night, we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what's wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom noise on the door or window. Almost immediately after he finished his sentence, boom, on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the 2 eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple of weeks later, I was at school. We were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day, my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up. As he called to say that he was on his way, he wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by within the creepy waves, everything. For a long time during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have recurring nightmares in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to rape and kill me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen that one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. If you ever want to hear some of the most fucked up stories you'll ever find in your life, just ask the regular graveyard guy at your local all-night convenience store for some of the shit he's seen. And dear God, man, bring some popcorn. In my life, I've been the graveyard guy for not one, not two, but 3 different 7-Eleven locations, and I'm going to bring the bulk of my horror stories to you lovely people. This one is about a gentleman named Richard. Working the graveyard shift, I was the lone employee from just after 10 o'clock at night to just before 6 in the morning. Not only that, but the next nearest all-night anything was another convenience store over 2 miles away, that from my store you could just barely see the light pollution of their neon. This setup alone made for many interesting happenings, and tonight it was a Saturday night going into Sunday morning, just after 4, when a middle-aged, give or take, male with thick glasses and week-old stubble walked in. He wasn't unpleasant at first. He made small talk as we walked through the store, sometimes to me, sometimes to no one in particular. He mentioned things about the weather. He asked about the hot dogs and taquitos on the grill. It was what it was at first. But then the comments started slipping in, minor vulgarities and weird things. After walking about the store for a good 20 minutes, he comes up to the register to check out, without anything to actually buy. I asked if he needed help with anything, and he asked me what I knew about the Antichrist. Alright, well, I know enough, I guess. I was raised Catholic, so I know quite a bit on the subject, I guess. And so, he stares at me. Eyes wide, mouth pursed. I wasn't sure if he was about to bite me on the face or kiss me on the lips, and not being able to tell the difference made me uneasy. The man. I should get a hot dog. Me. Alright. Which one? Him. One of the big ones. I want to enjoy it. There'll be no more hot dogs once the Antichrist comes. There's really no way to respond to this, so I try to go back about my work. But even as I walk, as I stalk cigarettes and start my nightly count, I could feel him watching every move that I make. He comes up to the register with his hot dog, pays, and I hope to hell we're done here. Thanks for coming. You have a good night. And I turn my back. And the man then says, "Can I eat this here?" Me. Probably not a good idea. The manager comes in at about 5:30 and he doesn't like if anyone's hanging out here. Stuff to do, you know? The man then says, "I'm not worried about him." The shit part about this is that I was actually partially lying. The manager James, my boss, and a really awesome guy, did arrive somewhere between 5:30 and 5:45 every morning, Monday through Friday. But he avoided the place like the plague on the weekends. I was trying to sell something that I knew wouldn't fly if this guy actually stuck around long enough for no one to show up. And now he was telling me he wasn't concerned about someone else showing up. Saturday nights are a busy time for convenience stores, but after about 3:30 they become a ghost town, and it was just me and this guy for one extended, uninterrupted, fucked up conversation after another. I'd try to walk to stock cups, lids, and straws, and he'd pop up right behind me. There'll be no cups and straws when the Antichrist comes. I arranged the beer and the coffee. There'll be no more coffee when the Antichrist comes. I realize it sounds like a joke, but his panicked eyes and horrible hinting smile made it clear. He was dead serious in everything that he said. 5 o'clock rolls around. Well, you should probably get going. Don't want that boss man getting mad at me now. He won't get mad at you. It's just he doesn't like people hanging out. We're just talking about the Bible. He said this so sickly sweet it made my stomach churn. Yeah, but still, he's going to be here soon. I'm not worried about him. I need milk. Okay. I point to the display case. He walks back, grabs a thing of milk slowly and robotically, inspects the carton all the way back to the register. I love milk, he says. Oh, really? Yeah, but there'll be no more milk when the Antichrist comes. The devil won't allow that. It's holy sustenance. Alright, so at this point I'm sizing the guy up. He's about 5'9" and I'm about 6'4", and I've got at least 100 pounds on him. So if things go south, I think I can get a few good knocks in before he pulls out my liver and puts it on his head. 5'10". Should really probably get going. The man, Jesus loves all of his children. 5'15". Boss is going to be here soon. The man, I'm not worried about him. 5'20". Is there anything else you need? The man, the devil is real. He then says my name. My full name. This is where two things happen that if I hadn't lived through it, I would have called bullshit to the person telling the story. At 5:30, for the first time in the almost 2 years I'd worked there, my boss James comes walking into the store on a Sunday morning. He fucking managed to unbluff my bluff with this guy. Secondly, and this is the jaw-droppingly hilarious part for me, James had been at the beach on Saturday. James had fallen asleep at the beach on Saturday. James had shaved his head fresh before going to the beach on Saturday. In other words, just as I told him he would, my boss came in walking in at 5:30 on the dot, with a completely shaved head, his long dark goatee and bright red skin. Me to James, what the fuck are you doing here? James, I honestly have no idea. He then looks at the guy. Who's this? I didn't answer. I looked at James. I looked at the guy and back at James. He looks at the guy. Let's go outside and chat, friend, James says to him. Less than 10 minutes later, the guy was walking off and James came back into the store. So, how are you? The fuck was that all about? Oh, Richard? Well, he started telling me about Jesus. I started telling him about witchcraft. He said the Antichrist was coming, and I said I was the Antichrist. Overloaded his circuits. He left. I love James. I wish this is where the story ended, but about 3 months later I'm outside of my store and smoking a cigarette with a few regular customers of mine, just chatting away. Somewhere in the distance I hear, Jesus, Lord God, help me. I perk up, but the people I'm with don't seem to notice. Jesus, please, I know you can help me. It's closer now, and I actually say, oh, please don't be Richard. Jesus, Jesus Christ, come down from heaven and save me, please, oh please don't be Richard. Sure enough, barreling around the side of the building and heading in my direction is a panicked, screaming, sweaty Richard, covered in his own blood. The people I'm with ask the appropriate question of, dude, is he fucking covered in blood? I, on the other hand, had only one thought on my mind, and I repeated it over and over again. Don't go in the store. Don't go in the store. Don't go in the store. God damn it. I crush my cigarette out and run into the store. In the few seconds he's been in there, I now have blood all over the doors, the floors, the rugs, and the countertops. Jesus Christ, please fucking come down and save me. I grab him some towels and toss them in his direction, trying to get an idea of the nature of his wounds while dialing 911. Now, I can't be sure because I can't say I've seen it before, but it looks like quite possibly like he tried to crucify himself. Alright then, 911. 911, what's your emergency? I have a gentleman in my store who is injured, screaming profanities, yelling about Jesus, and is covered in his own blood. What? His name is Richard, and I don't know how badly he's hurt himself, but yeah. I hear her typing. She asks the store's name, the address, etc. Alright, and you said that he's screaming profanities? Richard, who can't hear her. Fuck! Me. Did you happen to hear that? Yeah, yes I did. And you said he's talking about Jesus? Richard, who still can't hear her. Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, fuck, please fucking come and save me. Did you happen to hear that? Yeah. Yes, I did. And then Richard, in all his glory, does the one thing that makes any convenience store clerk go aggro, especially one on Graveyard. I turn away from him to give the operator the store incident number, and when I turn back around, Richard is now behind me, behind the register. I drop the phone. Richard, I don't give a fuck what's wrong with you. If you don't get out from behind my fucking counter, I will hang up with 911 and let you bleed to death right here in my fucking store. But the confrontation didn't last long. Before he could respond, there was 4 XXPD officers with me. I think the 911 operator hung up and left the area. Richard was handcuffed inside of an ambulance, and even the officers said it appeared he tried to do something harmful with religious significance. I thanked them for coming so quickly, and we laughed about the strangeness of it all. And then I asked a question I wish I hadn't. So who cleans up all the blood? That'd be you.
I have a story for you, told to me by my uncle just 2 days ago when I was visiting him at his home for Christmas in rural, almost bluegrass country. I'm an occasional The Truth Is Here reader, and as a city slicker I was curious to ask my uncle and 2 cousins, all avid outdoorsmen and ex-military, if they had ever seen anything spooky or that they couldn't explain logically while out in the woods, fishing, hunting, hiking, screwing around, etc. As for my cousins, disappointingly, neither one of them had any spooky stories. They told me about being startled or creeped out a few times by the calls of vixens and mountain lions, but nothing unexplained. My uncle agreed, nothing unexplained, but he did have a really creepy story to contribute that I thought belonged here. While I'm positive I won't be able to tell it anywhere near as good as my uncle did, he's a fantastic storyteller. I'll do my best. Furthermore, I want to be clear that this is a true story, and while my uncle is delightful to listen to, he is not known to exaggerate or lie. He has lived a life interesting enough that he has no reason to. I'll tell it in first person, but remember this is coming from my uncle who is in his late 60s. In late winter, maybe spring, 1968, I was in my last semester at the US Air Force Academy in Colorado, on my way to Vietnam as fast as I could get there. By that point I was getting bored, and I was really looking forward to graduating, and I took advantage of the increased leash we get as near graduates. A couple of times a week, I would drive up to a spot I found by the Snake River and fished for a couple of hours in the afternoons. One Wednesday, I get to the spot around 2, parked the Jeep pretty close to the bank, and got to fly fishing. A few hours went by and I had caught a couple dinky cutthroats. So I built myself a fire on the riverbank to cook them up for supper before rolling back to school by 9. I was sitting there by the fire, finishing up my second trout. Except for the river, it was quiet. I was by myself. I didn't see anything unusual, but this feeling of dread started to settle in, like something was wrong or something bad was about to happen. I couldn't put my finger on what I felt, but I was almost sick to my stomach. I decided to stay alert and see if the feeling would pass. If it didn't, I knew I had a little .38 revolver on the passenger seat of the Jeep, just in case. A fishing gun, you know. I kept picking at my trout, mostly listening for anything moving in the trees. A few minutes went by and the sick feeling was sticking around. In fact, it got worse. I thought maybe I'd sense a cat stalking a white-tailed deer. They had mountain lions up there, and those bastards are dead silent on their feet. So I knew just because I didn't hear or see anything didn't mean it wasn't there. I got up, slowly, casually got the .38 out of the Jeep and loaded it. I sat back down by the fire and put the .38 on my lap. I finished my trout and hustled to pack up, and I finally got myself out of there. 2 days later, Friday, I went back up to the spot to get some fishing in around noontime. I fished for hours. I think I caught 3 cutthroat that day. I was on the riverbank already frying up the fish when a game warden pulled up. I thought, oh no, they've got me now. You see, I hadn't bought a fishing license. I was going to be graduating and leaving, and I just didn't bother getting one. Now here's the game warden about to ask for my license and I don't have one. I thought maybe I could turn on the charm and maybe he'd not give me a ticket or let me go with a warning. He parked behind my Jeep and walked over. I said, "Hey there, I've got a cutthroat here. Would you like to join us?" "Hello, don't mind if I do." I chatted him up, but I think he could tell I was tense. I thought things were going well. He's here and he's eating the evidence. "Are you from around here?" he asked. "No sir, upstate, Buffalo, New York. I'm down at the academy, graduating in May. Do you mind if I take a look at your ID?" "Sure can," I said, and I handed him my student ID card. He handed it back. He looked out on the river and looked back at me instead. "You get up here much?" "Sure, whenever I can. I've been up here a couple days a week for a while. I was up here on Wednesday." His eyes sort of sharpened up and he frowned looking at me. "Wednesday? Same spot?" "Yes sir, same spot. I've gotten lucky with the cutthroat here." "Say, around what time do you think?" he asked. "Oh, I was here a while. I left around 4 or 5. I creeped myself out, tell you the truth. I kinda booked it out of here." 4 or 5, you say? Did you notice anything funny? See anything strange?" "No sir, I didn't see anything, but I got a bad feeling and I had to run." He goes on to tell me, right around 6 o'clock on Wednesday, a game warden right on the other side of the river from where we were sitting had found a dead body, freshly dead. They reckoned it had just happened. The man's ankles were bound and his hands were tied behind his back, and he was shot through the back of the head. He was bent like he was on his knees, like someone executed him. I never heard what happened after that, or what the outcome of that was, but this being 1968 outside Colorado Springs, I think that was an early drug trafficking hit. I think that's when people first started bringing large quantities of drugs through that area, so that's a story I've settled on after all these years. I think I must have heard or seen something that tipped me off, and I must have somehow perceived it when the body was being dumped. I didn't see anything that jumped out, but I think I must have felt it in my subconscious. I suspect that if I hadn't taken out the .38 and set it on my lap, something bad would have happened to me. And now, I always buy a fishing license.
This is less of a creepy one-person encounter and more a whole community creeped out by one man. The neighbor in question is somewhat famous for his lawn, an impossibly thick green landscape that he tended by a company. I've vaguely been aware of him losing it on the landscapers screaming at them outside. Enough, I knew he had a temper. The first real red flag that he might be legit crazy came last summer. He asked a teenage boy in the neighborhood to check in on the house once a day and make sure all the doors and windows were secured and water their flowers. The day they left though, he left a crazy list, saying the kid had to be there multiple times a day, turning off and on different sets of lights at specific times and leaving weird chores for him. Also, the kid was not allowed to walk on the lawn and had to remove his dirty shoes before walking on the concrete sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but was to turn off and on the lights from the doorway by means of a stick with a loop on it. Also, he was not allowed to use the garden hose to water the lawn and had instead to use a teeny tiny watering can. The letter implied that my neighbor would have the kid under surveillance and would have pictures if he failed to comply. Basically, the kid's parents called him and said they weren't comfortable with the situation anymore, and while they would keep an eye on the house, the deal was off. They argued over the phone. When my neighbor got back from vacation, it was early morning, and he immediately went to their house, woke them, and tried to pick a fight with them. One of the other neighbors is a retired cop and came out to see what was going on and tried to settle the issue. Crazy neighbor said that he would let it rest if he was allowed to bare-ass spank the kid. He flipped out when they told him hell no. Sometime after this, another neighbor was at the grocery store when he was cornered by Crazy Neighbor. Crazy Neighbor apparently just talked to him in a rapid fire for half an hour. Among other things, he started saying how wives shouldn't have friends and that his wife's sister was so fat she broke the toilet seat last time she visited. After this, everyone started talking about how you don't see his wife anywhere. Occasionally, she will be out watering flowers, but while her husband is seen out, she isn't. Considering that she used to be a social butterfly, this is weird. During the winter, everyone found pamphlets on their mailbox from the landscaper he uses, along with a note saying it would be mandatory now to use his landscaper in our area, and failure to comply will result in being sued. As we are private single-family homes with no homeowners association, so this is clearly untrue. During the winters, someone saw his wife, and her arm was in a sling and she had a black eye. When they went to ask her about it, he wouldn't let her speak and said that she had slid on ice. Since then, there have been a few attempts made to talk to her alone, and all have failed. They've gone so far as to get their church involved and to call a welfare check by the cops when he was out of the house. But if she is being abused, she has been refusing help. Snow was bad this year, and he blew a fit about the snowplows piling snow on his property, so he scattered screws on the roadway outside before they came by one morning. Then someone in the neighborhood got a puppy. It's quiet and has a fenced backyard. Its owners wake up in the middle of the night to the doorbell ringing. When they come out, crazy neighbor is standing on the road at the edge of the property. He tells them that the first time the dog gets out, they won't have a dog anymore, and pulls out a gun and waves it around before pointing it towards the backyard and saying, "Bang." Obviously, they go back inside and call the cops. When confronted, crazy neighbor claims he was out for a walk, thought they were awake, and stopped by. He says he didn't get the gun out, but it had been on his belt, and that he didn't mean his statement as a threat. He got some sort of citation from the police. Come spring, he has taken to sitting outside and writing something every time someone walks or drives by. We don't know what, but I have taken to driving differently home to avoid going by him. Most recently, someone put up a swing set in their backyard. They came back from work to find tire tracks through the backyard and the swing set run over and crushed. No one saw anything, but his massive truck tires happened to have the same kind of marks left behind. The retired cop has taken to compiling statements from everyone and keeping records because, well, we think this is gonna end badly.
I guess we all have that one area with a creepy building and terrifying stories attached to it. Where I live, it was a building where apparently shadows aren't allowed. Now, this confused all of us, because everything has a shadow, and it is quite mind-boggling to think of a place where shadows are not allowed. I also heard that this building used to be a hotspot for witches and Satanists, who do weird rituals in there. I have been invited by a couple of my friends to brave and venture into this strange building. Something for YouTube, I guess. But there have been other stories of people who have gone in there and came out different. When I say different, I mean possessed, insane, and just never again the same. But, to be honest, that just made this abandoned building even more attractive to venture into. We would all talk about it at school, and we imagined getting high and letting the drug do its work. We even started to speak of making this abandoned building our new hangout space. Eventually, it was me and two of my other friends, and all three of us had decided to go into this ghastly abandoned building. The day came, and we prepared ourselves mentally, and it was after school that all three of us met up. The day was quiet, and not many people were driving or walking about. It was one of those quiet days, and that made it even creepier. Thomas and Fred and I stood outside this building, just taking in its atmospheric effects into our brains. We could clearly see from standing outside looking in the open front door that there were needles and finished alcohol bottles all over the place. There was a street lamp just outside this building, casting a shadow of us three. As we stepped in, there was a strange tingly sensation that ran through our entire bodies, and our heads felt really light. We had torchlights with us, and when all three of us looked outside, we could clearly see that all three of our shadows were outside on the front door steps under the lamppost, and we all looked at each other and started laughing in amazement. We shined the torchlights at each other, and no shadow was formed at all. This experience completely dazzled all of us. Literally, none of us had a shadow. There was, however, a golden shiny vein running across our arms, but all three of us swore that we had never had this golden vein inside of us before. We decided to explore this building, and were muttering to each other and joking about. "This is creepy as fuck," Fred spoke. "Yeah, I know. Imagine sleeping here," Thomas replied. "I bet some have," Fred spoke again. It's weird that we don't have any shadows anymore, being in this building," I added to the conversation. As time went by, Fred started complaining that something was following him, and he could see something moving in his peripheral. Thomas and I joked around with him about it, but Fred was serious about what he was saying, that a shadow-like figure was following him. Thomas and I then reassured Fred that there were no shadows in this building, and we shined our torchlights at Fred and other objects, which showed no shadows forming at all. Then, something moved so quickly it made all three of us flinch, and Fred fell to the floor. Thomas and I quickly started to give aid to Fred on the floor, while at the same time I had noticed something strange about Fred's arm. His golden vein was chopped in half, and then it suddenly disappeared, and then black-like veins started forming around his body. Fred started shaking, and then Thomas and I tried our best to carry Fred back downstairs to the open front door. I noticed Fred's shadow that was once outside of the front door of the building, as it wasn't allowed to come in, had now disappeared, but mine and Thomas's shadows were still standing under the street lamp. Then Fred started speaking, but it wasn't his voice, but something else's. "I've been without a body for a long time, and now I have found one," Fred spoke. Thomas and I tried speaking to Fred while he was in this strange state, but being inside, but near the front door, Fred started to explain to us, or the thing inside of him started to explain more things about this building. He told us that it's not that shadows aren't allowed inside, but birth shadows with masters or bodies are not allowed inside. Thomas and I looked at each other, and then something caught our eyes. Fred had a new shadow, and we could see it trying its best to adapt to Fred's body inside the building. These shadows that live in this building are lost, like samurais without a master or a purpose. The golden veins in our arms were the connection to our birth shadows, which Fred's golden vein had been cut with his birth shadow by this new evading shadow that had been waiting for us in this building for a long time. The shadow he was born with was cut off completely. Our shadows do more than just follow us. They are our first protection against demonic possession and many more. Thomas and I knew that we were also both sitting ducks and could end up like Fred. We both quickly drug Fred out of the building, and mine and Thomas's shadows reconnected with us. Fred, on the other hand, we took to the hospital. Fred is still being treated, and we hope he will get better. I wish we had never went in there.
Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they had only dated for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate wanted, females only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bedroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she received an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there is a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door and an older man opens the door, at first Amanda thinks she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant, I forgot her name, was out and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Alarms start going off but aren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture. Nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walked down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Yeah, broken, for sure. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave by trying to be polite. As she's giving the guy her "thanks for showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of its house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With an emotion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and brother everything. Cops were called, they took her statement, and went to investigate. The Craigslist post has been removed.
My family never interested or believed in the supernatural or superstitions, and thought they were only just fictional stories or tales to scare kids or people away. But that all changed when we moved into this house. When I used to live in Germany, I lived in a very small town that wasn't well known. There were about over 2,000 people living there, but it wasn't special and kind of a quiet out in the middle of nowhere place. When I was very young, around 5 or 6, my parents recently got a divorce, so we moved into this very old home that has been around since World War II and had had an interesting history with the previous owners being unknown. The house had 2 parts, with the downstairs being another house connected to the upstairs house. My grandma lived downstairs with her art studio, as we lived upstairs from her. After 2 weeks since moving in, my sister was sick and my mom was at work, while I was with my babysitter at the park. My grandmother was taking care of my sister at the time, while she was alone with her at the house. My grandma decided to go outside for some fresh air in the backyard, while my sister fell asleep in her room in the upstairs portion of the house. While she was outside, she remembered she forgot to feed her rabbit, which was downstairs in the dining room. My grandma was in her mid-50s, but had a sight for sore eyes and was very keen on strange things going on. As my grandma got up, she felt an eerie feeling of someone watching her from the dining room window that looks out through my backyard. Turning around, she sees this full figure of a girl with light blonde hair and pale skin. She looked around my sister's age, 8, but she couldn't make out the face of who it was since they were standing in the corner of the window. My grandma was concerned that it was my sister who needed something from her, so she walked up to the upstairs to go check on her in her room, but she was sound asleep. When my sister woke up, my grandma recalled the moment and questioned her if it was her who was looking at her through the window. My sister was dazed and very confused and didn't really understand the question. She replied with, "I was asleep the whole time. I don't remember getting up for anything until dinner was ready." My grandma had a pale face. She was spooked and didn't mention what happened that morning after what my sister said to her. A few days later, my mom had a best friend who was considered her boyfriend at the time. They were in a very serious relationship and were planning on him moving in with us. He was also very young, around his mid-20s, and was very wealthy. He helped my mom out with getting a job, so she was very loyal to him. My mom invited him for dinner after work so that he was welcomed into our family and wanted us to meet him. When he walked through the door of our house, he had a weird feeling surrounding him and said that he felt very cold and nauseous. He didn't like the hallway of our house, as it goes from the kitchen to my room, which is at the end of the hall. It would always be dark in that hallway because the lights would break unexpectedly, so we kind of just gave up with having a light in the hallway. When he walked through the entrance, he went to the dining room to sit down. My sister sat next to me on the right end of the table and my grandma on the left of hers, with my mom across the table from her. Her boyfriend was sitting on the front part of the table facing me. While we were eating, my mom's boyfriend thought that he saw a flower vase move across the windowsill. Moving his head up, he saw the same white figure my grandma saw. He turned white as a sheet as it darted from the dining room to the living room and disappeared right in front of him into the next room. He dropped his silverware and flew back on his chair before grabbing his coat and dashing out of the house. He slammed the door hard enough to almost break the glass and later broke up with my mom after explaining what happened that night and vowed to never step foot in that house ever again. My mom got concerned as she was very confused on what had just happened and said he was overreacting, but was really heartbroken from him dumping her. A couple of more weird things started happening and became more frequent and violent as the weeks flew by. The clock in the kitchen would always rewind every hour. Light bulbs were being smashed and shattered everywhere. Kitchen drawers would be open, faucets would be turned on, and our furniture would be moved around. My mom got really fed up with the issue and didn't really understand what was going on. She would constantly blame me or my sister for misbehaving, but knew that it wasn't our faults and couldn't explain the unexpected and weird things that were going on until she told the neighbors that lived across from us the recent and old news that have happened since we lived in that house. Our neighbor was very curious, yet understood my mom's situation, so he invited her to have lunch with him to discuss it. The next day after, we visited the neighbor. He told my mom some creepy information that made my mom's opinion on ghosts become more open and refreshed about the house and the area that we lived in. This area used to be a Jewish community before it was blown up by the Nazis in World War II and rebuilt as forts and houses. It was a massacre with lots of Jews being killed and sent off to camps. If you look through the bushes in your backyard, there are old gravestones hiding between the bushes and some rubble left from the houses and buildings in this area. My mom had chills all over her. Her red flags were going off and she turned pale in fear. However, my mom was reasonable and wanted to send the ghosts to a better place in peace. So she went to a synagogue to get a rabbi to cleanse the house so we can continue to live in it. He agreed to do so, and my mom thought her blessings were answered. By the time he arrived back to our house, he took a 180 and went from agreeing to refusing to cleanse the house from whatever is haunting it. He told my mom that there's too much evil in the atmosphere and refused to help her and told her to find someone else to help her with the situation. My mom decided that it was our time to leave and leave quickly. We packed everything up as fast as we could, making sure nothing is left behind or something could follow us on our way out. She took all of us into the car and sped off with our packed boxes and left the house completely, never saying goodbye to anyone, and just left without turning back. She swears to this day that whatever happened in that house will never be talked about again because of the amount of fright she had from living there, and will never step back into the town we lived in.
In the mid-80s, my mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural wine regions, as we lived near both. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking my mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands, and Mom would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet Mom and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. My mom agreed, mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay my mom substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mom went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. My mom was told no one would be at the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what she said felt like 3 to 4 minutes, although she said it could have been longer. There was no other car on the property. She wanted to leave immediately, but had 2 rooms left to do. Both were bedrooms. She said as time passed and she heard nothing else, she decided that perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't the door after all. She walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As my mom got closer, she realized the photos were all of her. Some were taken at our family home and others were taken at other houses my mom would clean, some through windows or fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately drove to the end of the driveway. The lady ended up being investigated but continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police stopped with their searching and we ended up moving to a new town 4 months later. Every time my mom tells me this story, I get serious chills. Absolutely a true story too. To the day, my mom thinks that the lady had something to do with it. But why and for what purpose?
Big thanks to Corpse Husband and your maker for being part of this video. The links to their channels are in the description below.